My name's Helen Platts, and I've worked closely with Small Steps, Big Changes, or SSBC, on a number of occasions, and I'm really delighted to be here today to host the second of a series of shared learning events run by SSBC. Now, for those of you who are less familiar with our partnership, SSBC is a 45 million transformation programme supported by the National Lottery Community Fund's 10-year A Better Start funding programme, and it's about improving the lives of young children. Accountable to Nottingham City Care Partnership, a third sector provider of community services in the city, SSBC is a partnership of parents and professionals, and that includes Nottingham City Council, health partners, commissioners, voluntary and community groups, parents and local communities, all coming together to help give the best start for Nottingham's babies and children. Now, the SSBC programme itself covers 4 key wards in Nottingham: Apsley, Bulwell, Hyson Green and Arboretum and St Anne's, and is now on its 5th year of operation. SSBC seeks to deliver successful outcomes for children in communication and language, social and emotional development and nutrition, helping Nottingham children to grow up happy, healthy and confident. Now, it's likely, as you've joined us here, that you share our ambition, passion and enthusiasm for giving all children the best start in life. So we're really pleased you can join us. And it would be great if actually in this first instance, you were able to put your name and organisation in the chat bar so we can get a sense of who's in the room with us at the moment. We're also aware that some of you will be joining on your phone and might not be able to do that, but nonetheless, welcome. And we're really glad that you're here. We hope that you find today's session lively, relevant, timely and thought-provoking. And just before we start, a word about dads. When we talk about the importance of including fathers, we're also referring to those other important caregivers who are key role models in a child's environment, such as stepdads, grandfathers and uncles. And it's probably important to say here too that the research does show that children raised without the involvement of a biological father are not innately disadvantaged. As we know, positive male role models from a child's wider environment can support children's development and help them develop balanced views around gender. So what are we going to do here today? We're going to share the findings of consultation undertaken with Fathers in Nottingham, which was commissioned by SSBC and carried out by Quorum Family and Childcare. We're going to shine a particular light on fathers' mental health, which, without giving too much away, was a significant finding from the consultation. We're going to hear from Mark Williams, who will share his own experiences around mental health issues as a father and the work that's led him to be involved in an extensive research and campaigning on the topic. And we're going to hear from SSBC about how they're moving forward with their father-inclusive agenda in light of this consultation. So we hope by the end of the session that what you have heard will support you to reflect even further about the importance of including fathers and how our services might become even more father inclusive. So with me today, we have our co-host, Amy MacDonald from SSBC. Hi, Amy. We've got Megan Jarvie, one of our speakers, head of Quorum Family and Childcare. Hi. We've got Mark Williams, founder of the International Fathers Mental Health Day and the hashtag How Are You Dad campaign. And we also have Sarah Salem, SSBC Project Officer, Father Inclusivity. And joining us today for questions at the end is Carla Capstick, SSBC Programme Director. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So we've got a wide variety of people in the virtual room. Amy, who have we got? Can you give us just a flavour of who we've got present in our cyberspace today?
Yeah, I've been keeping a bit of an eye on the chat bar. So we've got Mark joining us from Northumbria University. We've got some of our Better Start partners joining us as well. Some of our local partners, our family mentors, and also some health visitors and midwives sort of nationally as well.
Brilliant, brilliant. And can you just take us through how the technology is going to work? Sure. We're sort of getting used to this, aren't we, in the COVID world that we live in, but just a reminder for how this is going to work.
Yeah, so we've got Sarah and Katie who are joining us today from Beacon House. So if you're having any technical difficulties, if you just pop a note in the chat bar, they will try and help you with that. We're really keen to hear from you sort of throughout the sort of presentation, and sort of when we're using Zoom, we can do that in two ways. If you've got a question for the speaker, at the bottom of your screen, you should have a question and answer icon. Unless you're joining from a phone, and then it may be at the top. And so if you've got a question directly for the speakers, we'd ask that you use that. They will only be seen by the panelists. The other option to sort of get involved is if you have just a general comment or reflection you'd like to make, we just ask that you pop that in the chat, and we'll sort of keep an eye on that and sort of try and reflect some of that through the webinar this morning.
Thanks, Amy. And please, yes, please do keep those comments and thoughts coming. It's really important to us that we hear from you as well as from the speakers today. Now, we hoped to be joined by a local dad, actually, but his baby has put in an appearance, as these pesky babies do. So he's tied up with all of that at the moment. But what we do have is a video we thought we would share with you that was made with some local fathers. It's from 2017, but I think it really still rings true about what it's like to be a dad in Nottingham. So we'll see that video now. Thanks.
It means a lot. If I had to say it in one sentence, is I live for the kids, and I wouldn't imagine it without them there.
You have someone who will just give you all the love and attention you could ever want and more. It sort of gives you a bit more of a purpose, something to keep you up at night even though you don't want to, and actually make you want to get out of bed and do something.
We go to most children's groups in our area. The actual special groups that they have on like weekends and things like that, we always make sure that we go to them.
I've been involved with birth, bump and baby, things like active play, cook and play, and that sort of stuff. And I have like a home visitor, so I have like a family mentor involved as well.
Yeah, I felt there were barriers. I think as a young dad, I was aware of those social barriers that are there as a dad. I'm not supposed to care. I'm supposed to be the breadwinner. I'm supposed to go out and work.
Normally the dad is the one obviously stays at work while the mums has the like full 9 months. I mean, it's nice to obviously have those play groups. I think the only barrier is depending on the job and what they're doing, hours, work hours, and then how you're feeling when you get back at the end of the day.
Let's look at the content. What's going to attract a dad to a particular group to make it exciting? So, for example, a Lego club or something like that.
Well, getting more dads on staff and actually get them into sort of more of the supporting roles, and have like the male health visitors come round and actually try and interact with men a lot more to get them more involved from an earlier stage, rather than try and shoehorn it later on.
Try and be confident and stay true to who you think that you are.
Take it in your stride sort of thing, you can't worry too much about it.
And you really do need to focus on the here and now and just enjoy the time you have, because it is very short.
Well, a heartfelt thanks to those dads who took part in making that video, and some very powerful messages there about what it's like to be a dad. I'm going to turn to our first speaker now, who was instrumental in who led the consultation with fathers recently in Nottingham, Megan Jarvie. So Megan, could you explain to us first the consultation process that you went through and what your main findings were? Did you see some echoes of that in the video?
Did, yeah, those videos were lovely actually, and they really echoed some of the things that we found in the consultation. So to introduce myself, I'm Megan. I'm Head of Core and Family and Childcare, and as Helen said, we were commissioned by SSBC to conduct this consultation with fathers, and we were really thrilled to be able to do it, because it's a piece of work that right up the street. We felt really passionate about it. It firstly is about really getting genuinely father inclusive practice, and secondly about recognising that co-production and really listening to parents is the way to design better services. So it was really great to be involved. And I did this piece of work with Mohammed, who has since moved on from Core and Family and Childcare, but I think he is in the audience today. So he may say something in the chat to add to what we're talking about, I'm not sure. But he did the majority of the interviews with fathers, so he really heard those voices loud and clear. So I'll start off, as Hannah said, about to go through what we actually did. And the first thing to note about what we actually did, so on the next slide we'll give a bit of detail about that, is that it was slightly different from our plans. Our plans initially were to go out and do face-to-face interviews, street interviews with 100 dads, and that was due to start in March last year. And obviously we had to change those plans quite quickly. We paused for a while because we thought life would get back to normal. When it became clear it wasn't, we changed. So instead conducted telephone interviews. And the plan initially was to do 100 telephone interviews, followed up by focus groups that we hoped would be face-to-face, but weren't in the end. But we actually found it was really, really challenging to recruit those fathers for telephone interviews. And we were offering a shopping voucher as a thank you for their time. We were working with partners who were working directly with families. We were using social media, but we only managed to recruit 40 fathers for the interviews. So we had a bit of a rethink, and we added onto the consultation an online survey. And by the point we added that on, we'd already started to get a really good feel from the interviews that we were doing. Key themes were emerging, key findings. And so the survey very much drew on the knowledge that we already had from the interviews to test whether the themes that were coming out echoed true for a bigger group of fathers, bigger sample of fathers, or and whether they were truly representative of normal, the sort of the common experience. So this is what we did: 40 interviews with fathers, 49 took part in a survey, and 9 took part in focus groups. So through the presentation, I've got a mixture of charts and tables which come from the surveys, and then quotes that come from the qualitative aspects as well. So you really want to know what we found, don't we? These are the key themes that I'm going to talk about today. So fathers' needs and preferences. What do they actually want and need from the services locally? And then so the next section is their experience of services. How far do these services match up to what they want and need? Mental health came out as an area for attention, a bit of a gap, and I think that'll be picked up by Mark later as well. And then communication and information. So how do we actually get information to fathers locally? And then I'll finish with some sort of summing up what we found with some areas for action. So if I start with what it is that fathers want, we asked about whether there were times in that fatherhood journey when the men felt more in need of support and information. And it came through so strongly that just before babies were born, and then the first weeks and months of a child's life were the real key time when fathers wanted more support. And it wasn't just a kind of, oh, it would be nice to have a bit more information. There was actually a really strong thirst, sort of desperation. Some of the words that got used were around overwhelmed, lost, really struggling. So they felt very, very keen for that extra information. And there was an acceptance that services did and should prioritise them last often. So it was mums who had just given birth, babies who were all working out, socks off to keep alive and keep happy and healthy. They were the most important, but they still felt like they needed a little bit of support themselves, and that they wanted to be able to do more to help in that unit, to help everyone thrive. The kind of thing that they wanted was some of the basics, just around how do we keep this little being alive, temperature, feeding, a lot of the basics, but also around how to support their partner, and some of the more complicated emotional issues as well. Now, to me, this seems like a huge opportunity, because you're pushing an open door here, that almost all the fathers we spoke to talked about how keen they were to engage at this point. And it's also a point where there are quite a few, or there's more contact with services through midwifery and health visiting. And on health visiting, I should say that in Nottingham we don't have health visitors. We have community public health nursing. But the fathers, how language takes a little while to catch up with what reality is. Fathers often talked about health visiting, and I know we've got a bit more of a national audience today, so I might use that as shorthand occasionally. So yes, so there are those services that are often going into the home, having that close contact, and so there's a real opportunity to build those bonds and set patterns that can last throughout childhood, for how the dynamic works, particularly around fathers. There were needs at other stages as well. This wasn't the only area that came up. You can see on that graph that the other bars do have things on them as well. And apologies to anyone who's looking at this on a phone and probably can't see any of it, but I will talk around everything that's in the graphs. But the needs as children got older felt less acute, less sort of urgent and desperate for right now. But things that were mentioned was around transitions, and changes in behaviour as children get older. So that movement from baby to toddler, things that come with that, like managing tantrums. They wanted ideas around supporting development, activities that you can take part in that are helpful for children. Childcare came up as something where I wanted information. And then one that I think is a bit more tricky for services to think about how to meet was that they wanted more support at times that were particularly disruptive for them. So that could be moving house or relationship breakdown, an older sibling starting school. And it can be more difficult for service to know about when those moments are, to be able to step in and offer that extra support. In terms of what kind of things they wanted, one of the things we asked about was a support network. We've got that on the next slide. And there was some consensus, some divergence here. The consensus was that almost all the fathers we spoke to said that they thought that fathers didn't have the same access to a support network as mothers did, that mums were much better at forming those WhatsApp groups and those links where you've got a group of other parents that you can ask questions of. Where there was differences is whether it was something that they wanted or not, that some fathers really saw it as a negative aspect of attending groups, that they would have to talk to other parents. They didn't want to do that at all. They didn't, they didn't want to have that network, whereas others really did. And really wanted to have other people that they could share those parenting experiences with. And one of the quotes that I've put up there is, there's a sense of bravado amongst dads, so they don't stay in touch afterwards, which I found quite sad, really, that they felt like it wasn't by choice that they didn't have that support network and that group to draw on. It was because of societal expectations, is what they felt. And I know that a lot of people say, I work with so many mothers that don't have a support network. There's so many isolated mothers out there, and I agree there are, but this was the perception from the dads that we spoke to, that it was something that was very gendered and different. So we also asked them about what factors made them engage with services, and what things they thought were important. And the thing that came out most important was staff, which again I think is a really positive thing to find, and there's so much opportunity there, because I've not met a single family-facing professional who doesn't want to do everything they can do to meet the needs of the families they work with. And that was really appreciated by fathers, that they saw staff's knowledge, skills, friendliness. Those were the things that made the difference between whether it was a positive and negative experience, and that's what they wanted. Timing also came out as an important factor here. It was often in the interviews, it was almost always the first thing that was mentioned when he said, oh, what makes you either go to a service or not? Is it a time when I can actually go? And it came up in the video there as well. It was rarely mentioned as one aspect on its own, so there's often something else as well. So I don't think evening and weekend services are a kind of a silver bullet for solving everything, but it is something that's worth considering and thinking about. And I think one of the interesting points around that it wasn't just whether fathers could go, because we spoke to plenty of fathers who didn't work a Monday to Friday 9 to 5, but it was also, they felt that the timing often sent a message about who was welcome and who the service was for, I suppose, and that they worried that if they were there during the day, that people would think, well, why aren't you at work? What's gone wrong? And that they'd feel judgment, that they feel like they shouldn't be there. They should be out at work earning money for their family, and it was a bit of a luxury that they were there. Okay, so I'm going to move on now to talk a bit more about whether their father's experiences of services lived up to those wants and needs. And the first thing to say is fathers were overwhelmingly positive about the services they were using in Nottingham, which was great to hear. So I put this chart on here which asked about what the negative experiences were, and you'll see that the only bar that you can really see on there, the one that shoots up much higher than all the others, is fathers saying nothing. They didn't have anything negative to say about their experience of using services, which is fantastic. So everyone here, give yourself a pat on the back if you're delivering these services in Nottingham. However, we didn't let them get away with just that answer. We probed a bit more deeply, and we asked more about what sort of things could have been better, because I think unless we're continuously improving, we're going to end up going backwards. So we wanted to look for those opportunities for improvements. And I'm going to talk more in detail about some of the criticisms that came up, but I want to make sure that that is framed within these criticisms amongst a huge amount of positivity. And you know, I've put this one up from the survey because it was so reflective of the interviews and focus groups as well. So if we go on to the next slide, so some of these represent a whole range of different feedback that we received from fathers. And there was a slight difference between whether fathers were attending an appointment when they would normally go with their partner, or a group, you know, stay and play or similar, where they would often go on their own. For the appointment-based services, one of the main criticisms is they thought they were very welcome. It was nice to go, it was useful, but they didn't really feel like they were needed or even particularly wanted there. It was, I think the first quote that I put on that slide sums it up nicely. I felt like I was tagging along rather than being an active participant. And that was generally the feeling that that came out of the interviews, that they were a nice to have rather than a needed, which didn't particularly, you know, going to these appointments can be hard, where you have to move things around. And when it felt so optional, it wasn't something that they necessarily did all the time. When it came to going to groups when they went on their own, they would there was a whole range of barriers that actually, some of them quite surprised me. So I expected that when fathers went to groups, they'd feel like, oh, I'm a great dad, here I am, and everyone would be very praising of them. Instead, some of them talked about feeling like people would think there was something going wrong in their family, which is why they were going instead of a mother's, and that it was viewed as a bad thing, that the mother wasn't there and there must be something to worry about, and feeling that they were going to be judged for going. On top of that, there's how the staff welcome them and how the group's set up. What's harder to control is how different parents interact with each other. So some of them felt like the other parents, the other mothers, actually, if I'm going to say what they said, didn't want them there. They'd rather it was a female space, and they wouldn't necessarily include them within conversation. And the women all sat around in a clique, and I'm sat in a chair on my own, is the quote that I've put there. And it's worth picking up as well that there were different barriers for different people. So the final quote I've got there is, I find it alienating going to suburban services as they're not very diverse. So this came from a man of Indian heritage who was saying that, so he felt not only did he stand out for being a man at these groups, but also for his ethnicity made him feel different. And another father pointed out that within some of within his community, that actually the wider family was more likely to provide that support, and that was the norm. And that going to services, engagement services, and the developmental benefits that they could bring wasn't really recognised as much as the importance of the family role. So I'm going to move on now to talk about mental health, because like I said, this came out as a big gap. So those stats at the beginning that I put on the slide, so 10% of the fathers we spoke to, this was from the survey, 10% of the fathers that did the survey were asked or offered support with their mental health since becoming a father, whereas 91% said it would have been useful to receive that information and support. That's a huge disparity, and that's reflective of all the other strands of the research as well, that it came up as something, not just a sort of theoretical, this is something that I think should be done, but there were some fathers that said, actually, I needed this and didn't get it as well. So it felt quite alarming in some ways. They acknowledged, there was a widespread acknowledgement that the fathers struggled sometimes with talking about their mental health, and it wasn't an easy task. So this first quote, I think, sums it up nicely. We know that men are less inclined to talk, but I don't think it helps when mothers are proactively asked and fathers are ignored. And that was quite a common sort of theme to come out. And it was interesting how this played out in the research, because during the interviews and the questions that we had in this area, fathers quite often felt uncomfortable answering them, and they were shut down quite quickly. Whereas in the focus groups, where we were able to feedback, some of the findings from the interviews, to say that it was a common issue and that there wasn't support often out there. Fathers felt more able to open up, and quite what often happens is that one father would share an experience, and that would then create the space for the other fathers to do that as well. And I think that they also talked within that about the importance of role models in creating space to talk about feelings and emotions and difficulties. So there's the quote: "Other men who are willing to share their experience and open up can give space to those who say, oh yeah, I relate to that. It's always hard to be the first person to open up." So we saw this role modelling happening within our research, as well as being told about it, as something that would be useful. And what they wanted was, although they acknowledged it's a difficult conversation sometimes and that they might get some resistance from fathers, they wanted a very similar process to what they saw mothers getting, where it was just asked as a standard question without any kind of judgment or targeting. It was just a standard question that mothers were asked how they were doing, and they wanted that too. And around mental health, some did also say that they wanted a bit more information about how to support their partners as well, and particularly around what to expect at different stages, and what was the normal difficulties of early parenting, and when they should be concerned about their partners. It was something that came through as a need as well. So the final theme that I want to talk about was the actual, I love doing this piece of work, but this was the only bit I found really hard and dissatisfying, if I'm honest. So it's around information and communication. So what came through quite clearly is that fathers were not accessing information. They didn't know where to look. They didn't know how to get that information. But we didn't come up with a clear answer of what they did want to make that easier, which felt quite frustrating. So I said that for the interviews that we struggled quite a lot with recruitment. The most common route for recruitment was, when we asked fathers about how they'd heard about it, was my partner suggested it. And then through the interviews, when we asked about how they accessed information, partner was by far the most common thing that was said. So they're quite reliant on their partners. And this is, you know, it's where we're at. We need to accept that and think about how to plan around, you know, meet fathers where they are and then build on that. But it raised a whole lot of concern, particularly around single fathers, because given that in other parts of the research, fathers said that that moment of relationship breakdown is when they wanted extra support. They're also, their means of accessing information might have broken down along with that relationship, which is quite concerning. So there are different quotes there around information and communication. There were different things that were suggested, but no consensus. Some wanted social media, some didn't. Some wanted regular emails, so they wanted to sign up for information regularly being sent out. But there was quite a few disparate views, I suppose is the thing to say there. Okay, so I'll sum up now just with some of the key areas that I think we could think about when we're planning going forward. So some of those areas for action around focusing on that period just before and for the weeks and months after birth is when there's a real appetite for engagement, and that's one that we can really maximise and set up patterns that hopefully should last throughout childhood. In one of the focus groups, a dad went through this list of things that they would like a professional to do and how to make it feel easier to attend appointments and go to groups, which I felt like summarised a lot of the things that had come up in other interviews. So it was greetings on arrival, regular eye contact, questions that are particularly targeted towards the father, and then active engagement conversation with them. And it sounds like to me the list of things that we all think that we do every day, and then suddenly your group's much busier than you thought it was going to be, or you've got 101 things to get through in an appointment, and they get a bit squeezed. So having that as a checklist I found quite useful. Role models I talked about, particularly around mental health, but it came up more broadly as well around creating the space for being an active and visible father as well, that seeing other fathers using services can help with accessing them as well. Mental health I've talked about, and so that the gap there around checking in with fathers and recognising that they are also likely to have needs and wants in that evenings and weekends perhaps as being better, and then the issue around information as well. and I've got a very well-timed note that my internet connection is unstable. So
yes, I can
stop talking.
Thank you very much, Megan. You did just fade out a little bit there, but thank you very much. That's really rich, isn't it? The information that you got there. Thank you very much. Let's go to Amy to take a couple of questions from you guys who are listening here. Amy, what have we got for Megan?
Yeah, just a couple of comments to sort of reflect that first. So I think there was people enjoyed listening to the local dads sort of talking at the beginning, and actually there seemed to be sort of the experiences both from the consultation and the dad seemed to resonate with people in the audience as well. There was an interesting one about dads more likely to seek support around mental health if they knew they were going to be seen as a priority. So I thought that was just interesting to pick up on. But the first question that's come in, Megan, is around the demographics. So sort of the question was specifically around kind of the ages of the children, but I wonder if you wanted to say a bit more about the demographics generally.
For the ages of the children, we were speaking to fathers with children under 4, and within that there was quite a range. So we spoke to some soon-to-be fathers, as well as some whose children were some that had older siblings, so some that had children that were quite a bit older than that as well. So there's quite a range on that. More broadly on the demographics, so for the interviews, we gathered information around ethnicity and the age of the fathers themselves. The ethnicity was a really good reflection of Nottingham's population. We're really pleased with that. The age, less so. We didn't get as much contact with younger fathers as we would have liked to, and that's true for both the survey and the interviews. We didn't ask about income, so we can't break down by that. But from the experiences that we got, there was quite a lot of variation in types of work that fathers talked about doing. So we spoke to several who were working a couple of jobs, working antisocial hours, as well as people that seemed to have more office-based, who might be slightly higher earning fathers as well.
Yeah, there was a comment in the chat bar actually about sort of working hours, and sort of like some people saying 8 to 6 is kind of typical working hours for Nottingham dads as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think yes, there were some that do have. Yeah, typically there were quite a few who, if they did work a sort of 8 to 6 day, also felt like they were able to negotiate some flexibility. So might be able to pop out for appointments or to go to groups, but others who didn't have that same flexibility. And I think that's, it's an interesting, different experience for different fathers as well.
Thank you. Any other questions, Amy, or are we happy to move on?
There was really a question around, was there anything that fathers said around whether or not they wanted services just for fathers? Did that come through?
We asked about that, and there were different opinions again. So fathers are not a homogenous group in the same way that mothers aren't. So some said that the vast majority said they would attend fathers only services, but there wasn't a clear preference that they would prefer fathers only services. What they really wanted was services that made them feel welcome as fathers. A number, because I talked about some of the social awkwardness that fathers felt going, particularly to groups, and some of that was felt to come from other mums and feeling different and excluded. But some also really appreciated that they thought women were better at chit chat. If I'm honest, that's some of the feedback that we got, and so actually much preferred going to mixed services for that reason, because it made it less awkward for them.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah.
Yes,
put in the chat here, a lot of fathers were sceptical that father-only events would actually be able to get fathers to attend as well.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we'll come back to that. I think that's possibly a bit of a theme. Well, thank you very much, Megan. We're going to have another opportunity to put some more questions to the panel later. But let's move on now to our second speaker now, Mark, who's a keynote speaker and a founder, as I said, of the International Fathers Mental Health Day and the hashtag #HowAreYouDad campaign. So, and once again, a reminder to everybody, please keep those comments and questions coming. That's really, really helpful for the speakers. So Mark, I think you came to this subject area through your own direct experience, didn't you? Do you want to tell us a bit about that and the extensive research now that's led you into following on from those experiences.
Yeah, Dave, I got some slides as well. Yeah, basically from a personal experience, obviously, and leading into the work I'm doing now. I'm all about parents, really. It's never about taking attention away from mum. What I'm saying, you include all parents during the perinatal period. It has far better outcomes for the whole family and their child's development as well. So yeah, like you said, coming from a personal experience. So my story really happened going back, oh gosh, 2004 now. Didn't know nothing about mental health, totally uneducated. I was 30. Next slide, sorry. And I remember 22 hours labour, you know, the doctors come rushing in. It was 3 doctors and said, Mr. Williams, your wife needs emergency C-section. We need to get into theatre quick. And it was the first time I actually had a panic attack. I've never had a panic attack like that and since. And I've worked in secure units, so witnessed horrific things after my son achieved my career. Nothing still to this day thinking your wife and baby's going to die in that situation. Michelle went on to have severe postnatal depression, where unfortunately she was in crisis team very quickly. You know, I expected to be back in work in 2 weeks. So, you know, it took over 6 months. And I wasn't the same person going back into my job in the sales at the time. The pressures I couldn't take eventually. But during that time, my personality totally changed. And that's a lot of things to look out for in fathers, especially in the antenatal period and the postnatal period. You know, I became very withdrawn. I was very, I felt anger. I never felt anger in my life in the first year of fatherhood. Loneliness, gosh, couldn't tell my friends, couldn't tell my wife how I was feeling because I didn't want to impact on her mental health either. And then, you know, he started using negative coping skills. And I had a lot of family support around from Michelle, obviously. And, you know, but unfortunately I was using alcohol because my mind was constantly racing. And what's really important is a lot of fathers like myself got undiagnosed disorder sometimes. So I was only diagnosed with ADHD at 40 years of age after 4 years after my son was born, when it hit crisis for various and other reasons, because I hadn't dealt with everything else in my timeline as such. Bipolar schizophrenia, you know, ADHD, ASD. A lot of these fathers like myself self-manage that, and a lack of sleep, you know, severe lack of sleep can cause psychosis, as we know. It's so important that, you know, sleep, as we know, for your mental health. But like a big factor is, you know, up to 50% of fathers actually suffer depression looking after a mum with post-depression. So in the work I've done over the years, when I set up a group going back in 2011, really, it was only support fathers with their partners with post-depression. It was mostly the mums who used to phone me up and say, Mark, I'm fine, or I've been supported. Can my husband come to the group, or partner? Because what it was happening was, it was actually impacting on their mental health. And so many relationships are broken down. Simple fact, because way men or dads present, they, you know, and what we know, I didn't get this overwhelming feeling love for my son. And the science, evidence and research actually says that sometimes it can take a bit longer, but the fathers haven't got this information. And, you know, I always put the question is, when you think of post-depression mums, there's not one thing the fathers can't experience. Guilt, not good enough, can't bond with, you know, what about social services? Fathers experience those experiences, and certainly I did during that time as well. You know, I was getting suicidal thoughts around about the 4 to 5 month mark. Never made a plan to take my life, but I was so unwell. And, you know, loneliness, like I keep mentioning, it's huge amongst fatherhood in the first year. So like I said, what really happened then, from that time, I suppressed all those feelings. I didn't know anyone, I didn't know any other father's experience of what I went through. Luckily for me, what came out of it, because my wife, Michelle, was still an amazing mother, but at the time when she was unwell in bed, I was off, you know, skin to skin with my son, and like little baby massage and stuff. I was self-taught that. And what's that really good? It actually releases oxytocin, which actually is good for mum, dad, and the baby, because what people don't realize, testosterone lowers during this time. And if we can engage the father with the baby, that releases a massive induction of dopamine, which is a reward system, which helps you really get engaged. So that's why we should be engaging fathers with their babies as well. And the reason why we should be engaging fathers with services, because then if dad is mentally well, supported, I should say, then he's more likely to play, rough and tumble play, engage, sing, and that has benefits for the child. The still face experiment on dads, I would recommend you look at. That's all of my work as well. So like you said, and if dad is well, you can support mum even better as well for anything. It's all about a family approach. We have to get a family approach for services now, because somewhere along the line, like mums, when I used to be an advocate years ago, mums had post-depression or PTSD years ago, and they weren't screened or assessed, and they enter mental health services years later, and they never get the root cause of them. And a lot of fathers don't, because PTSD is an anxiety disorder, either witnessing or experiencing a life-threatening event. And we know some of the severe symptoms are nightmares and flashbacks, but we've got to remember it's an anxiety disorder. So the next baby comes along, his anxiety now is going to be higher in the antenatal period, because now he's got to go into a labour ward where a smell can trigger off PTSD, as we know. So, you know, certainly for myself, it put me off having any more children. The communication with the parents suffers. You know, I don't want any more children. I don't want my wife to go through that trauma. Then it puts you off sex. Then your partner's overthinking, is it me? Is anything I've done? Because there's a lack of communication with parents sometimes, and that can be a big problem. So we need to educate not just fathers, but the mums to look out for signs and symptoms about if fathers are struggling during this time as well. Now, NICE guidelines has nothing on fathers in the CG 192 NICE guidelines. So they are, every time I say to them, why is this happening? Even the World Health Organization, nothing on paternal mental health. So we know there's over 600,000 male suicides, and it's high risk. The evidence says of a high risk in new fathers. Like I said, they don't get diagnosed. They get diagnosed with depression or anxiety years later, and we still have nothing on that on you know, with the World Health Organization. Every time I go to NICE guidelines, they say there's not enough evidence. Well, I'll show you. There's evidence out there gone from 91 beyond, and this is why I started doing the work I've done then. So the group I passed over to another charity, and then I started trying to change policies and get this in place so it'll have a bigger ripple effect to help all parents for their mental health. And we got to remember, same gender parents, everyone should be entitled for that support in the perinatal period. Next slide. So on a positive, like I said, I started doing talks and started working with Dr. Jane Handy in 2011, and she educated me about perinatal mental health. So I had the lived experience, and there's a big myth of men don't talk. When I started doing my talks about my own experience, and Brian and other people who was working with the groups, the men were talking, were telling me loads of things. So I used to go back to Jane and say, Jane, do you realize this? Dad's getting intrusive thoughts, he can do something, baby. Dads are getting all these feelings that they never talked about before. And then we started writing stuff and articles on it to demonstrate this happens to fathers as well as mothers as well. So up to 50% of fathers actually struggle, can become depressed if the mum has postnatal depression. Well, my argument is, it's only if dad is struggling, well, it's up to 50% the mums getting impacted. Because what happened when I had my breakthrough or breakdown, my wife's depression came back now because now she was caring for me because I was so unwell. And the reason I didn't get the help early on, and I was working in mental health services during this time, was because I was afraid if I went to the GP, it'd be on my notes and I would never get a job in mental health. So there's loads of barriers and myths we got to break down to make sure the fathers do get that support in place as well. Next slide. So like you said, raising awareness, going on television, radio stations. And this is not a UK concern, this is a global concern. And this is why I set up International Father's Day, Mental Health Day. This is happening all around the world. There's different, especially America, Australia, they're doing a lot of good work now. And like you said, we have to get that family approach in place. Next slide. So there's a couple of journals that demonstrates as well. So I'm always happy to share these journals, which me and Jane have done. And what we found as well is that birth trauma is huge. Fathers not asked, they're not debriefed, and then basically they suffer. I've had a father 29 years ago who only found out what he witnessed was far worse than me in the labour ward, and he lost everything, business, everything. And when he, when he did find out, it was due to what happened in that labour ward. So 29 years later, and this will happen with mums for years. We are getting better with mums, as we know. But then still that needs to be addressed as well, because birth trauma and PND does overlap, and sometimes those treatments sometimes are totally different. So we are diagnosed with PND, but postnatal depression, like Michelle was. But when Michelle had done a timeline of trauma, when after I was unwell, it was the biggest part was the traumatic birth. So if there's anyone watching the Birth Trauma Association, I would definitely recommend you look at. Next slide. So that's what we did. How are you, Dad? It's a good thing I have an ADHD. You have all loads of different ideas. And like anyone knows about ADHD, you're self-managing that, and that can be a struggle sometimes. So you will come across parents who've never been diagnosed with any sort of ADHD or ASD as well. And so it's always a day after Father's Day as well. So like you said, Perinatal mental health. Sorry, next slide. Perinatal mental health, as we know, is the big umbrella. So we shouldn't just be talking about postnatal depression in fathers like is being known. We got to talk about antenatal anxiety, depression. You know, fathers who've had psychosis actually after a baby been born because they've had bipolar and lack of sleep can have a massive impact as well. So there are loads of reasons why fathers struggle with their mental health during this time. The transition of parenthood, you know, the identity, lack of communication, loads of factors. But unfortunately, men still today in 2011, you know, we have got the biggest killing men under 50 is suicide in the UK, and we're not engaging with fathers, and we're not asking anyone to diagnose anyone on. We just want, you know, somebody to acknowledge the fact that fathers can struggle during this time as well for various reasons, as we mentioned. Next slide. So these are some of the reports out. Like I said, we just talked about the NCT. So they did a report, you know, 39% of new dads were concerned about their mental health, and 73% were more worried about their partner's mental health as well. So that's a big factor. You know, this is a thing, sometimes they don't engage with the partner sometimes because they were more concerned as well and worried about their partners. But like you said, high stress can lead to anxiety, that leads to depression, and unfortunately this leads to the biggest killer in men under 50, which is suicide. So early prevention is key. It actually saves obviously all the things. It interlinks with so many other areas. Fathers over the years, fathers unfortunately can't see their children because they present as not good enough fathers, but in fact during our time they were really struggling. So like I said, we need that education and programs in place to explain about you know, how important the skin to skin is and engage the father for that good bond and attachment as well. Next slide. So young fathers, like I said, coming from a youth background, I'm a youth worker in 2006, and the one reason why I got into mental health because there was a lot of young suicides in Bridgend going back in 2008, and then I started educating myself more about mental health. So young fathers are very passionate about as well. There's different pressures as we know with young fathers. You know, 39% of young fathers wanted support for their mental health as 2018, and 34% of the fathers are not with their child full time. So this is why we have to engage more quickly with fathers and get their support and communicate them better. Next slide. 62% of fathers, dads felt mental health difficulties did get in the way of forging good connections with their children. So that's the Fathers Network 2019. November had just done a report. 1 in 5 fathers felt totally isolated during the first year of fatherhood, and up to 3/4 used with stress. 3/4, which as we know, extreme stress leads to anxiety, depression, to the biggest killer in men under 50, which is suicide. Next slide. So this demonstrates, this is 2007, remember. 2007, that gives you a good picture what the factors we need to include in the work we need to fathers. And like I keep saying, this is not about taking the attention away from mum. We're saying if you support dad better, it will have far better outcomes for everyone and the whole family approach as well. You know, fatherhood has totally changed. When my father was minor, my grandfather's, you know, fathers are more engaged. Mums luckily are now in Parliament. But the way it's gone, unfortunately, as we know in different countries, that ain't the same. But now we have to start, because if dads are more stay-at-home dads and they're depressed, that can have a massive impact on our child, I should say, as well. So that demonstrates. So 1 in 10 fathers suffer from postnatal depression. That's by research. We know that's far higher, because once we get men talking now better and engaging better, we'll find that will be very much high. But 1 in 10, that's research over many studies as well. But some studies say up to 25%, but on the overall average study is 1 in 10 fathers actually struggle. Fathers left in a labour ward, not engaged, left there, you know, we are asking in all booking appointments, there should be a 5-minute conversation. If you haven't got time to have a 5-minute conversation, then we need to change the practice. Because even if you're doing something, there's no excuse. We have to have a 5-minute conversation at least and ask the dad, how are you doing? Give him information so he can process and take home and make him feel he's not the only father that's going through these struggles during this time. Because when I met Brian in a gym accidentally and asked him where he was going, he said NHS prams or for postnatal depression. Why? I opened up to him side by side and I told him more things in 5 minutes, because I related to him, he related to me. So the myth that men don't talk, they will talk, But if you've got somebody who can actually make them feel, and I, like I said, over the years, the amount of parents have told me stuff, I'm still learning off of parents as well. Next slide. I'm just cautious of the time, I am. I'm trying to do a whistle top to her.
There's so much there, isn't there, Mark? Yeah.
So this is the report I've done, and everyone can actually access this report as well. I wanted something tangible to give to the politicians and commissioners to say, look at this evidence. This is from professors, doctors, parents, and this is a research and evidence that says we have to start including fathers in services as well. And also employers need to understand when they go back to work that fathers could be struggling, because the amount of fathers who unfortunately lost their jobs because they can't function because the simple fact that early prevention wasn't in place is huge. And next slide. And on a positive, I always leave it a positive. Obviously, there's a film coming out on Amazon, obviously next month, I think it is, on the back of the book. And it's education. So when you watch the film with real actors, unfortunately, we couldn't get Tom Cruise. He was in lockdown, but we got some actors. And it's a wonderful lady doctor who's wrote the script. And when you watch a film, it's to educate not just fathers, but mothers. That needs to happen. So that's coming up next month. So any information you need or any resources, please just let me know as well.
So thank you very much, Mark. And listening to you, it's reminding me of my own personal experience with my second baby. It's a while ago now, but I had postnatal depression, and I don't think anybody ever asked my partner how he was. And we've often reflected on that. Actually, when we came to baby number 3, we'd actually thought about what might happen if that happened again. It didn't, but he realised he would need some help too. So that's all really interesting. I know we're getting quite a lot of good questions and comments. Amy, do you want to? I think there's a couple of questions people would like to put to Mark.
Yeah. So one of the questions come in, Mark, around where services have limited resources, what's the best way to sort of reach out and ask dads how they are? So I think some of the suggestions that were put forward were like text messages or postcards, or whether you've got any other ideas.
Yeah, no, exactly. SMS in Australia, they use a text system. We got apps out there now. There's loads of things happening. NHS England are screening and assessing dads in the long-term plan now, but that's only if mum has postnatal depression in the special services. A lot of that, like I said, dads, it gets a mile point, and we need to, manifest it. But going back to the question, it can be, a letter, engage fathers. People often ask me, how do we engage fathers? Just talk to them, have a conversation. That's the first step. Even from the forefront, when mum gets a bounty pack, dad's left out, so there's automatically assumed, okay, this service is not. Little things like this. And that's what if we got small steps, make big changes, we can have a massive shift. We're not asking small steps, conversations, and then we'll see a massive shift through services as well. But like I said, Zoom, we got Zoom today. You can get 50 parents. I do work with a midwife, and we get 50 parents at a time to do a Zoom chat to check in with each other and give them the information. Dad needs that information as well, and literature which he can relate to sometimes.
I noticed there was some real heartfelt pleas from practitioners about, with budget cuts and with the pressure and the templates and the information that they need to get. And somebody suggested, what about just a postcard? Just something that's up front going, here's a really simple way, here's the signpost. Because I suppose you need to touch all sorts of bases, don't you, to get in touch with dads?
Yeah, the thing is what's the problem when I find enough for fathers? When the conversation can be happen. I worked in hospitals. You can have a conversation when you're doing something. That's not happening. There's no conversation. Even ask, how are you doing? Do you realize this can happen to you? It takes a 2-minute conversation. This is the thing. It's just a conversation. If he will remember the person who asked him about his mental health, because they may be not family members not be asking. You're right, something tangible. If you haven't got time, like we're doing stuff with Welsh Government now, something tangible to give to him, and give to the mum. Let mum know that dads can struggle, because it does look different in fathers. The way the drinking, avoided situation, going to work, can't be at home, can't cope with things, overwhelmed. So we have to look at people's behaviours. Dads check the baby. Dads get intrusive thoughts. everything mums have is mental health happens to any, anyone, can't it? So that's the thing. Sorry.
I think there was another question, Amy, about research on dads during COVID, was there?
Yeah, there was, and whether or not there has been anything sort of specific.
Yeah, it was an American study just come out now that 82% of dads and it was 64 of mums wanted support for their mental health, and that's in a journal. So I know there's other stuff coming through that I'll probably get in next, but yeah, it's huge. Dads then get left in the car park, not engaged. Actually, it's the mums actually have been contacting me and say, Mark, gosh, I need my husband in the scan, as we all know itself, but it's having a huge impact, unfortunately. It's huge. And I mental health services, what I'm afraid of, unfortunately, if we don't get this right now in the early prevention stages, our mental health general services are going to be overstretched years down the line.
Indeed.
And that will have an impact on a child's development in the first 1,001 critical days. It's 2,000 critical days in Australia, but it's 1,000 critical days. And that's what I'm concerned about. Because if dad's at home alone and if he's depressed, they're not going to be motivated to engage with the babies.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I know, keep those comments, keep those questions coming. There'll be some time, I hope, at the end for panelists. And also, I think we're going to post in the chat bar a link to your report, Mark. So hopefully that will happen shortly, when everybody's going to get copies of these slides and presentations anyway afterwards.
Yeah, we'll actually share it with the post-webinar pack. So
okay,
that'll
we'll
be available
do it
on
that
the website.
way. Yeah.
And if anyone wants it, I did a TEDx talk on the importance of fathers' mental health. Show the dad that as well. Get him to understand that his other fathers can struggle during his time as well. So
yes, thank you very much, Mark. Now, before we go to our third and final speaker, I want to take this opportunity to highlight a couple of questions we have for you, for those of you listening in. And we're going to ask you to post your answers to these questions at the end of the session. But for those of you who really like to have a think before you get put on the spot, here's the questions we're asking you to respond to. So we've got a bit of a national audience today, and we'd like to know, from your experience on a scale to 1 to 10, how effective are services at recognising fathers' mental health needs in your experience, if 10 is brilliant? And 0 is very poor. And the second question for you is, in your experience, what groups of fathers do you feel are overlooked? We've had some mention of young fathers. Are there other groups of fathers who you think really we ought to be paying more attention to, and services ought to be paying more attention to? So we'll get to that again at the end of the session, but let's go to Sarah Salem, who, as I said earlier, works with SSBC on this particular issue of including fathers. Hi, Sarah. She's going to give an overview of how the findings from this consultation are helping to support SSBC's work around father inclusivity, and how SSBC is also rising to some of the challenges outlined in Mark's talk just then. So you know how it works now. Any questions to Sarah into the Q&A, any comments into the chat bar. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. So hi everybody, my name is Sarah and I work within the SSBC project team. I'd like to tell you all about some of the things that SSBC is doing to respond to the consultation. My specific role is to work together with the wider SSBC team, local fathers and our service partners to promote and improve father inclusive practice within Nottingham City. This includes supporting existing services to develop their holistic programmes of care to be more father inclusive. Next slide, please. So Small Steps, Big Changes is committed to improving short and long-term developmental outcomes for children aged below 4 years, as Helen told us at the beginning of this webinar. Since 2014, SSBC has acknowledged and celebrated the important role that fathers and male caregivers play in the lives of their children. And father inclusive practice is actually named as a strategic outcome. To inform the father inclusivity strategy, and within the interest of our core principle of co-production with parents, a consultation was commissioned. Next slide, please. As the consultation with fathers was so recently concluded, we have yet to develop a direct response to the findings. As we are committed to co-production, our priority at this time is to share the learning and to discuss together with our networks a robust plan for progressing father inclusivity in an effective and sustainable way. So the findings of the consultation will be acknowledged within the development of a formal father inclusivity strategy and to progress our operational plan. As I've already said, sharing the learning amongst the partnership is key to supporting evidence-based practice development. We are grateful to have a group of really dedicated individuals who participate in the Father Inclusive Practice Group, representing their respective organisations. This group serves as an origin of ideas, and so the findings of the consultation will be explored at length in our 2 monthly meetings. Whilst the consultation provided us with a great introduction to the wants and needs of fathers, our consultation with fathers does not stop there. We are going to be setting up a fathers advisory group to consult with local dads on all aspects of our agenda. The first task will be for them to name the resource we are producing for new and expectant fathers that I'll be showing you in a minute. SSBC has a training offer for Nottingham City early years practitioners called Think Dads, which aims to provide a rationale for father inclusive practice, as well as practical advice on how to be more father inclusive within practice. This training is paused due to COVID-19 and will be redeveloped with the findings of the consultation incorporated. Next slide, please. So focus on paternal mental health. So as Mark has demonstrated alongside the excellent findings of the consultation, mental health support for fathers is an area which is requiring immediate attention. COVID-19 has certainly accelerated the figures of individuals experiencing mental health difficulties. So now is a prime time for focus. And with regards to research, the Fatherhood Institute has also done some research into this, so it's worth looking on their website. Extensive evidence demonstrates that poor parental mental health can have an immeasurable impact on children. And that's why it's important for us to focus on that. The Children's Public Health Service in Nottingham are doing an excellent job at prioritising mental health support currently. To contribute, SSBC recently commissioned the Institute of Health Visiting Perinatal and Infant Mental Health Champions training to support staff confidence in managing parental and infant mental health. This session was bespoke to include an introduction to supporting paternal mental health, and we hope to commission the dedicated Fathers Perinatal Mental Health Champions training later in the year. There's also a dedicated chapter to emotional wellbeing within the resource we are producing for new and expectant fathers that I'll show you now. Next slide, please. So as you can see here, there's 8 chapters within the resource. These will be printed on A5 full colour booklets, and the plan is for them to be distributed by services who visit families within the antenatal period. The aim and purpose of this resource is to promote paternal confidence. Confidence comes with knowledge and understanding. Fathers within the consultation spoke of wanting to know basic information, such as how to handle their baby, a normal temperature, examples of that. All of this is included within the resource, either in written form or by way of signposting to official websites such as nhs.uk. The hope is that this guide will demonstrate to fathers that early years services are deliverable to them too. There is also encouragement throughout to contact key services for more support. The Children's Public Health Service in Nottingham operates a texting system. It's called Text Health here in Nottingham. In other areas, I believe it's called Chat Health, wherein parents and caregivers can text at any time a single number, regardless of where they're located in the city, for support. And this text will be picked up by a specialist community public health nurse during normal working hours. We've signposted heavily to the service throughout the guide, as we feel this will support fathers who work typical working hours, therefore are less likely to contact services during the hours in which they work. Whilst they will get a response the following day, this is an excellent resource for us to signpost to support fathers in being more engaged with local services and to be more proactive. The resource has been written predominantly by me with the support of my colleague Hayley. My background is in health visiting, so much of what's contained is really based on my practical experience of what dads have asked me. All information contained is evidence-based. My colleague Cara within the communications and marketing team has done an amazing job at condensing down the reams of information into a format that is more universally comprehensible. And the design has been done by our fabulous external graphic designer, Liam. We have submitted the initial 3 chapters to individuals within the wider partnership for comment this week, so that's really exciting. Once we have collated and responded to the comments from the wider partnership, we will then demonstrate a full first draft to fathers for appraisal and for them to check that the language is something that they want to hear. If there's anything within the resource that they feel is missing or is not necessary, then we will listen to that feedback from fathers. So next slide, please. Excellent. So this is a snapshot of one of the double page spreads of the breastfeeding chapter. So we know from evidence that the level of peer support women receive is the main determinant of successful and continued breastfeeding. That's very well evidenced. So focus on fathers as instrumental in the breastfeeding journey rather than being bystanders is really the ethos of this guide. There's information about the way that breastfeeding works so that fathers can understand more thoroughly the process and therefore understand more why certain advice is given. So when we're talking about sort of having regular breastfeeds to keep up the breast milk flow, if they actually have that sort of basic knowledge of how breastfeeding works, and that will support them in supporting the mother of their child. Next slide, please. So another great chapter is emotional well-being. So this chapter supports fathers in being an emotional support system for their baby's mother and primes them for what to expect in those initial weeks, which was actually something that did come up in the consultation. If I remember correctly, one father described the sort of immediate postnatal time as daunting. So we want to be able to support them with that. This chapter also promotes healthy lifestyle choices, including smoking cessation, ways for fathers to improve their own emotional well-being, and symptoms for them to watch out for that should be not ignored in terms of their emotional health and in terms of the emotional well-being of the mother of their child as well. There is signposting to online resources, as well as local NHS mental health support services, which is also the IAP services that we've already just spoken about, to the GP and to the Children's Public Health Service. We have a page on managing stress and infant crying with signposting to the Icon Cope resource. And there is information within the guide about male victims of domestic abuse, the signs of this, and how to get local and national support. Next slide, please. So the final page I'm going to show you is our financial benefits and employment rights. So something else that was quite commonly cited within the consultation was that how short paternity leave was. So we wanted to really make sure that fathers had an informed decision and that they were able to make informed decisions about how they chose to use their paternity leave, that actually shared parental leave is an option in the UK. And I know that financially it's not viable for a lot of families, but it's important that they know that that is something that they can consider. And there's also clear information about the various financial benefits available for families, including sort of tax-free childcare, Healthy Start voucher, child benefit, universal credit. And again, we've got that critical signposting to the government website where they can check their individual criteria to check what they are eligible for. Next slide, please. So to conclude, here at SSBC, our focus is to further father-inclusive practice with co-production as a foundation. We are committed to progressive project design, which is realistic and sympathetic to the limitations of service delivery. If we get all those things right, we hope to achieve sustainable change, which will benefit children and families long after the SSBC term. Thank you for coming today. Yeah, that's the end of my presentation.
Sorry about that. I'm not coming off. Ah, there I am. Thank you. There's always the odd gremlin in the system. Thank you so much, Sarah. And that's going to be a really rich resource, isn't it, for fathers? What a rich resource that is going to be. So very interesting bit of work. And I'm just wondering, you know, you also have real experience yourself of practicing in this field. So you know, what's worked well in your experience of getting fathers more included? We've listened to a lot of conversations. What would you pull out as being really key?
I don't think that professionals have to do much differently. It's just about including fathers in all the conversations that you're already having with the mother of the child, addressing them by name. I think somebody said that in the comment section. That's so important, is actually saying, you know, what's your name, what's your background, and talking to them about their childhood as well, if we're talking to mothers about the experiences that they've had, because not only does it support the family, but it also supports your professional understanding of the dynamics of that family and the support networks that are available to that mother and to that baby, and ultimately contributes massively to the caregiving environment generating any child in that household. So I think don't do anything too differently, just involve them in all the things that you're already doing. And I think that's the answer.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. Amy, what else do we have for Sarah?
Yeah, I guess there's often sort of a question asked around, you know, obviously we're doing a lot of work around trying to include fathers, but what about the cases when fathers aren't involved with their child?
So this agenda is all about supporting child outcomes. So we have to think about fathers in terms of fathers that are actually having contact with their children. So that's because SSBC's focus is on child outcomes, not specifically on all adults. So what we would do is support the mother of the child to understand that actually positive role modeling can come from different individuals within the wider network, so that child is not disadvantaged by the fact that they have an absent father.
Yeah, thank you. Carla, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, and I think Sarah's probably covered that off, and I think the stuff that's come out about single fathers in particular has been highlighted, and the reliance on their partners for information as well. So just thinking about how we might approach those fathers too, and being clear and I think sensitive to the role that culture plays as well, around gender, and just having having in the back of our minds that there is some unconscious bias that exists around stereotypes, but also being aware of how culture might affect the relationship with gender and the roles that therefore people are perceived to play within their family. And I think that's really important that we're just aware of that, as well as acting on it in some of the very simple ways that Sarah and I think the rest of the panelists have highlighted. Just saying hello to dad, just acknowledging them, asking their name, asking a bit more is so important. To make them feel more included, and we'll support them to then feel more empowered and involved, and hopefully, as Sarah said, ultimately improve those child outcomes as well.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So thank you very much, Sarah and Carla. I'm just going to remind you again of the questions that we'd like you to address. I know some comments are coming in. We've had somebody mentioning that in their experience, they'd be giving the services that they know are 3, and saying that actually all dads are underrepresented, but if they had to pick, it would be the younger group of people. So could we, I'm just going to ask Katie or Sarah to share the questions again. So in your experience, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective are services of recognising fathers' mental health needs? And are there groups of fathers who you think are particularly not paid attention to? And while you get on, so we're getting some numbers coming in, I'll leave Amy to have a look at that. And I want to just bring the panel back on to ask, the panel, Mark, do you think that there are things that employers should be doing to help, specifically employers should be doing to help with the issue of fathers' mental health? We know that a lot of fathers don't take parental leave and they don't have much anyway, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think you read my mind this week. I'm actually trying to get out of work, not so much outdoor maternity services, but actually educating employers now, Samaritans, all these different organisations. We know, especially perinatal health, is only health visitors in the last recent years of again this education of midwives, but it's society. So in educating employers that dads can struggle during the time. I know that we got the mental health first aid, which is out, but it's not much. It's not on fathers, the impact and stuff like that. So that's the areas I'm going to be approaching. When they go back to work, reports, or even before they go off. The antenatal period, I love to see dads antenatal support in place before and deal with the problems before it gets to that lack of sleep and the birth trauma. That's the ideal world. But you're right. Everyone needs to take responsibility, employers especially, and they might have services within the organizations like that, you might not get the special, but I know we got IAP services, but it might be some wellbeing support in place from there as well, so.
Yeah, thank you. Megan, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there is a huge role for employers around being open to the discussion. I think that there's a difference in treatment because mothers take a much longer, generally, not in all cases, generally take a longer period of maternity leave. There can be that question when you come back about how do you need work practices to change? And that conversation rarely happens with fathers after a very short period of paternity leave. And so it's then harder, I think, for fathers to raise the issue themselves. And again, it's something where we see a disparity between different fathers, and those in more secure employment, where there's more options for flexibility compared to those in less secure employment as well.
Absolutely. Amy, what have you got for us? I can see there's some comments and thoughts coming in. Thank you very much, everybody, for getting back to us on those answers. They're still coming in. Amy, what are your reflections on what we're getting there?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting sort of scores coming in. I particularly picked out a 9, obviously, which is a really good score from a mother and baby unit. So, you know, I think potentially there's some good practice happening there. And I think probably the rest of the scores probably aren't scoring as well, sort of ranging between sort of a 2 and a 6.
Yeah.
And I guess also when we're sort of looking at the dads that are sort of missing out, there's kind of, I think there's a sense that most dads are missing out. Potentially we could be doing more for all dads. But, you know, the things that we've sort of mentioned already, again, people are sort of noticing in their areas. So young dads, ethnic minority dads, those that particularly work longer hours, and those sort of lower socioeconomic dads as well.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to ask the panel, I'm going to come to Carla first. What thoughts do you have about targeting some of those groups, Carla, that we've just heard about? So specifically young dads, Black and Asian dads, and those in lower socioeconomic groups, because these are, you know, we're not, you know, that we want to engage all dads, but it stands to reason, and what we've heard is that some are more excluded than others.
Yeah, and I think we've got a huge place to play in terms of engaging with all fathers, as we've said, and I think the research that Quorum have done for us, and obviously backed up by Mark's own experience and other research and national evaluations that have been done, is that there isn't a clear consensus around how we might best engage with fathers, and therefore how we might best engage with those that are even more on the exclusion, you know, on those boundaries, if you like. I think what we need to do is keep trying new approaches, keep trying new technology is an option. COVID has sadly highlighted for us that, you know, more fathers and potentially more broadly the population, that we may have greater concerns around mental health. What COVID has also done, though, is highlighted new ways that we can work and engage with people. So we have seen some services thinking about how they might use digital, how they might develop resources that are online, virtual offers, having app-based things, and I think all of those are worth trialing and testing in order to reach those different demographic groups as well. And there is some fantastic practice already happening in some areas of the UK and internationally as well, and I think we'll share some of that with you, and particularly around role modelling, but also around specific types of resources that you know, engage either with young dads or with dads from an ethnic minority group. So there is stuff happening out there, and I think it's beginning to start to learn that and build more around the evidence base to further support work going forward.
Yeah, and on that issue of sharing good practice, Mark, I mean, because there obviously are really pockets of great practice, and we've got a 9 in there, you know, how can we do that more effectively?
Yeah, like I said, it's, well, over lockdown, I think we've done stuff on Zoom, you know, 500 parents in Zoom, being a midwife, and, you know, well-being, and I think communication between parents is a huge thing. That's the thing. That's what you got to look at, getting the parents to communicate as well. That's the factor, and that's what we'll be doing in lockdown is getting both parents to say, look, you know, checking with each other. If it's, you know, don't isolate yourself, don't overthink, because people tend to overthink things and mind read, and or is it me, or so that's a big factor we got to get the parents to communicate and give them the knowledge and education as well that parents can suffer during this time for various reasons. But it can be simple. I think walk and talk groups, you know, very effective. I didn't get funding when I started, but it was basically just a chat at a counsellor free, and the men will talk. They will talk. This big myth of men don't talk. You get somebody to open up. It's like a genie bottle. They'll just talk, but in a non-judgmental way as well. And that can be a man or woman. I've had only talking last night, it should be men's groups. No, I just totally disagree. There's 3 women, ladies I know, I work with. She's got more information than some of the men. Our counsellors say more when we started. Sometimes they just want to chat to Sarah. They didn't want to chat to me, like, which is, you know, probably I talk too much. So I totally think if they're not got empathy, understanding, knowledge, and have a conversation, like I'm having a call to you guys today, that's what it's all about. That's what we aim for. If we can change that, everyone change 5 minutes in practice to engage father, that'll have a ripple effect.
Thank you. And Megan? Sarah, anything else to add on that sharing good practice?
Or can I pick up on your previous one actually about
yes,
targeting
please do.
services? And I think it's interesting to draw on. So this isn't findings from this work in Nottingham. This is from elsewhere in the country, where we've worked more from the professional side and professional engagement. And one of the things that's often really struggled with is the need to risk assess, and that gets in the way of strength assessing fathers and can act as a real barrier to engagement. And particularly when you're talking about fathers that might be particularly struggling to engage with services. We worked particularly with young fathers who constantly come up against the barrier as being seen as something that's being seen as a potential danger to their family rather than a strength to their family, which is really, really difficult. And it's hard. I'm not saying there's an easy answer to this, because the domestic violence exists. It's something that needs to be addressed and needs to be assessed. But we really need to be honest and address whether we have unconscious bias and we're thinking more about certain groups, certain fathers within that, and that every father is a potential strength as well as a potential risk, and much more of a strength than a risk as well, I think.
Yes, yeah. And there's a comment there, very telling comment from a person in the room saying men are acknowledged when it comes to light that something's going wrong. And that's when there's a more in-depth discussion. And actually what we need to do is to be thinking about our own unconscious bias and being inclusive, as Sarah said, right from the beginning.
Can I make a point to that?
Go on, Mark.
Well?
Yeah, please.
I think that I'm not going too much into the rest, but that conversation needs to happen to both parents as well, because I think sometimes it's only happening to, and in my experience, I'm not going to go too much in depth, but so that conversation needs to happen, because that's stopping fathers engaging with their health visitor. Because that conversation, the mum will say, "Oh well, I was asked this," and the father's like, "Hang on, why wasn't I asked?" And so that's stopping fathers actually engaging with services. So that conversation needs to ask, and we need information on fathers as well. That's what we're trying to do in Welsh Government. There's no information on fathers in some services. So
sorry, what do you mean? Can you be a bit more specific? Information.
Health professionals, I'm not sure if it's like in your area. There's no information on dad when they go into
okay.
So safeguarding, there's loads of reasons why we, and I won't go some of the stuff I found out over the years on here today, but it's a safeguarding concern as well. That's all I would say.
Yeah. And I know there's been a comment further up in the chat bar about issues about reaching stepdads and dads who don't live with their families and often have to go through mums to even get to give their consent to speak to them, and yet they're still within the child's environment. Yeah.
Can I respond to that aspect?
Yes, please do, Sarah. Yeah.
It's my view that if we engage fathers into services early on, so antenatally and in that initial postnatal period, even when further down the line there may or may not be a relationship breakdown, because they've had a positive experience of being engaged initially and therefore realise that those services are deliverable to them as well as fathers, they would then see the services as for them when a relationship breaks down. So it's all about progressive change when it comes to that aspect.
Yeah.
I'd completely back that up, Sarah, because I think that particularly around that fathers that we spoke to not knowing about how to get information and what was on offer and relying on their partners, I think a lot of that is set up right at the beginning, because the mothers typically have more time off at the beginning, and so have to work out which is the reliable and the good sources of information, and that's how it gets set up. Yeah.
Thank you. Amy, what else have we got there? Comments or questions? I know, and really thank you very much. Everybody is posting their own experiences and their own thoughts. This is really useful. What would you like to highlight, Amy?
I think there's a question around whether or not there's a role for an increased male workforce, and whether or not that workforce also may need to be quite diverse, and how we kind of might address that.
So Mark, I guess, what are your thoughts about that? We'll start with you and then we'll go to Carla.
Sorry, I was looking at the questions come through, sorry.
So this is about, should there be an increased presence of men in the workforce, and should that presence be more diverse as well?
On the workforce, yeah, funny. Yeah. I did a piece on The Guardian last week. I think it's 0.4% of men in maternity services. Luckily, my son's going to be a children's nurse. He wants to be. I have no influence on me. I'm away. We've got to encourage more men. Thankfully, now there's more women in parliament. Like I mentioned, it's about I'm all about gender equality. I am, you know, we got to encourage, and like you said, it's not the fact that women are better talking to the father. I'm not saying that, but it may be that time the father might be feel that he can talk to that male midwife or health visitor, that sort of thing. The only problem I get, I think me and Sarah talked about, when male health visitors do actually get in that role, sometimes they're more likely to get promoted quicker, which is which is unfair, because we need to keep these men in these roles as well. That's not really gender equality on itself. So like you said, we need to encourage more men to come into these services. I know certainly I would have gone into it when I started, not I know now when I am in it, but when I do talks, you know, 99%, this is a 50-50 problem, 99% of support for dads, for mums, and, you know, so yeah. It's a 50-50 problem.
Yeah. Carla, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with Mark. I think we've still got a huge to do across the whole of kind of society around our gender bias in society around particular roles, and who traditionally goes into those roles, whether that be there are more women in early years children's services, whether that be in maternity, health visiting, in PVIs, in nurseries, daycare. They tend to be more female dominated, just as there are more men probably in the fire service and the police service, and, you know, in the building trade and construction. So I think we've got a huge part to play, and I guess that starts at the home, and it starts in communities, and it starts with education in schools as well, around how we start to view gender differently. And I think the more diverse a workforce is, the more that will support our diversity generally, and how we then include more people in different aspects, not just on this agenda, but across the whole piece. So
absolutely. Amy, what else have we got? I know we've got some comments coming in, some of which have scrolled up, so I can't see them, so I'm losing them. They're very valuable.
They are really valuable, and it's really interesting sort of around their male workforce diversity, because it feels like there's perhaps some mixed views. Some people are really kind of acknowledging, so again, there's male workforce and mother and baby units has been seen as really useful. In other places, it's been sort of acknowledged that some women actually want to speak to females, and actually the sort of last comment coming in is around some dads are just happy to talk to anyone so long as they feel sort of listened to. So again, probably there's no sort of silver bullet really there on kind of the right thing around kind of male workforce and diversity.
It wasn't actually something that the fathers we spoke to mentioned.
It wasn't at all.
Interesting, no. And that was surprising to me. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And a comment there with people saying that actually there's something about those caring roles, again, being undervalued and perhaps not paid as well. So there's a whole policy, workforce agenda and societal problem about these caring roles being undervalued and maybe therefore not being as attractive. A suggestion here that we need a bank of male volunteers of all ages and from different backgrounds that can speak to fathers. Interesting thoughts, Sarah. What about that? Just before we go.
Yeah, I think peer support is really important. It's just about how do we set up that network when, like we've already identified, a lot of dads work 9 to 5. Finding volunteers that are able financially to do that is also tricky, but it's a great suggestion.
It is indeed. So I guess I'm going to put the final question before we go. It's a tricky one, but I'm going to put it to you, Mark. When do you think your job around getting fathers included, how would you know it's time to wrap up? You've done.
Gosh, good. That is a good question there. Yeah. I'm very positive. I've got to be positive. I think it is changing. It is, especially when I first started 11 years ago. Gosh, the stigma, you know, how can men get depressed, or what are they going to be depressed about? Dads, I should say, they didn't give birth to the baby. I think we've come a long way from our time. I think so. Yeah, I can see in the next 5-10 years, I can see a big shift. I think things happening now as well. So when I'm done, gosh, I don't think I'll ever be done when it comes to the mental health side of fathers. Probably going to young fathers. As I never coming from a youth background. I want to get back into the youth work side, or eventually one day, and educate the young dads coming through, because I think they feel, you know, can imagine, oh, you're too young to be a dad, you know, why you got, you know, why you do that, you know, all that stuff, and then, you know, they go for the same struggles I went through as a 30-year-old, you know. Unfortunately, that can lead to other things, you know. So that's education programs I like to see more of, and
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Well, I want to thank, I know we're coming to the end of this webinar now, and I want to thank all the panelists and particularly the presenters and all of you who've taken part in this. And thank you very much for the richness of your comments and questions, really helpful. So as before, Amy, I think it's right that we're going to keep these comments and thoughts, and we'll share a summary of them on the SSBC website. And we'll also be putting the links out to I think somebody asked earlier on, I've lost those links, you know, I know people mentioned them. We'll gather those and they will also go on the SSBC website, will they not? Yeah. So that's the end of our second shared learning event. Thank you very much, everybody, and see you very soon.
Thanks. Thank you.
Bye.